This question from Mark Wade Hampton, understanding that contractors must meet 100% of the market basket items, and the draft RFQ says that the contractor is expected to cover 90% of the NSNs in their applicable supply classes to be considered. So, you know, I'll do that, and then I'll check and see if the others have some answers there. But what that means, the market basket is really just the high spend items for each one of these commodity areas. These are the high demand items that we've seen in the past fiscal year. In addition to those items, there are many more that we do still need to support. And so the intent of that is we're going to evaluate for pricing the high spend items, but we also need to look at your catalog offerings to make sure that there is a breadth of product. Jody Ann, Maria, Donna, any other thoughts on there or comments?
Walter, you nailed it.
All right. So there's a comment or question in here from Jeremy regarding in implementing federal strategic sourcing initiative and our the dollars to spend and usage that goes to small businesses, and the concern that is out there within the industry that these efforts are focusing the spend on a fewer number of small businesses, while we're seeing that the total dollars that do go to small business going up. And you know that is one of the balancing acts that we have to do in the current budgetary environment. We need to look for savings and being able to drive our savings and spend. The current small business regulations really only measure the dollars that go to small business, not the number of small businesses that receive dollars. So there is that fine balancing act. That being said, we still do work with the Small Business Administration on trying to ensure that we are working to represent small businesses, that we are addressing and trying to improve our usage of small businesses and the subcategories as we roll these out. That's the effort here that we try, that fine balancing act. There's a similar question: have all the socioeconomic parameters been met? We are working to address those and make sure that we, to the best of our ability, cover the socioeconomic status. Question: is GSA willing to provide individual BPA holders a purchase history report? This would help suppliers better understand the number of direct orders in lieu of depot shipments. And I'm not sure how that applies here. All of these procurements will be vendor direct shipment. There will not be any that go into depots once we stand this up. There's several questions I've seen in here regarding whether the Buy American Act or the Trade Agreement Act applies. Because of the size of these contracts, the Trade Agreement Act will apply, not the Buy American Act. There's a question: do you anticipate a change in how the government procures non-Trade Agreement Act items, such as toner cartridges that are only manufactured in China where no TAA version exists? Again, unfortunately, with the dollar value of the procurements, we are held to the Trade Agreement Acts. And as far as getting a waiver from the Trade Agreement Act, that's an area that's been under discussion with the U.S. Trade Rep for a number of years. I mean, I'm familiar with at least 12 years of discussion with the U.S. Trade Rep, and at this point, there just does not seem to be any movement to move away from compliance with the Trade Agreement Act. And where that leaves us, you know, we may not be able to supply some items to some customers. That's unfortunately where we are. Question, when will suppliers be able to start bidding on the market basket? As we said, we've got the draft the draft procurement document out there. Comments are due by the end of the month. I believe it's 26th. We'll review the comments, and then we'll work to get the procurements out within another month or so. So, you know, keep posted on Interact. We'll keep you posted. So there's a question here, and I think there's still confusion here on some of the questions or comments. And I'll just take Jeremy's as an example. If savings is that obvious under FSSI contract, why are they being made mandatory to buyers? Well, the FSSI is not being made mandatory at the government level. Some agencies are working to set their individual usage policies. The value there is, in addition to the pricing, is the ability of being able to get data on what is being procured. This is the one piece that we don't have in other purchasing channels. We don't get to see that transaction line item level detail. And that's what helps agencies monitor their spend and improve their buying behaviors.
Walter, I'd add to that. We're not making it, this isn't part of making it mandatory. Currently, GSS has many single award contracts for supplying inventory to its distribution centers. We are merely moving away from all those individual contracts to leveraging the FSSI contract as our single vehicle to supply that. So we're not, you know, we're not making it mandatory. We as GSS are choosing to use that vehicle and leveraging that spend on one acquisition, right, versus like 3,000 different contracts.
Thank you, Patrick. Question, did I say that FSSI requisition channel will impact all BPAs that are associated with or support a distribution center?
Yes.
Yes. Question, will GSA evaluate the national stock numbers prior to finalizing the market basket to be sure they are not considered ETFs? Yes, that is part of our process that we do go through. Just still going through the questions here. David puts a comment in there, the need purchase quantity and location history to calculate estimated freight costs. I'm not sure we're going to be able to provide that to the detail that you're probably looking for on there.
I think we have estimated quantities.
Right, but as far as locations that
Correct.
they go.
Continental U.S., I mean, that's, our customers are all over, and that's what it will be. I think for the OCONUS part, though, we do speculate 2 consolidation points possibly.
Right.
Okay.
And there was a question in there regarding, that I saw earlier, regarding the marking to the mill standard and Fed standard, that if these are going to the end customer, why do we need to do that? And a high percentage of the shipments do go to DOD, and especially the consolidation points that do need to have the marking and packing requirements there. So, question, what is the difference between the requisition channel and the purchase channel? So the purchase channel are those customers who they generally have a GSA Smart Pay purchase card, or they are a contracting officer or a purchasing agent that is authorized to make purchases, either using a purchase card or using a purchase order. Requisition channel are those generally non-procurement people. They submit a requisition, which is a transfer of funds, interagency transfer of funds from their agency to either GSA or DLA to have supplies shipped to them.
Right, and the big difference too is with requisition, GSA processing the transaction via mill strip or Fed strip. So in purchasing channel, an agency can independently do it with a purchase card or wherever, and that's where you're collecting the data. On requisition channel, because I saw a question about data, we do have all that transaction data because we process the transaction, which that also is why part of the requirement for the EDI requirements and such is so you can process the transaction through our federal pay systems.
Thanks, Patrick. So there's a couple questions in here on the industrial funding fee and if it still will apply for the janitorial and sanitation products and the maintenance, repair, and operational support products, because those are going to be blanket purchase agreements against schedule. Your schedule industrial funding fee will apply. For the office supplies, which is going to be an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract, not based on Schedule 75, there is no industrial funding fee that is added. So for your bids here, you're not adding an industrial funding fee.
Walter, I just want to mention that in OS3 we do have a 2% fee though. It's not the IFF, but it is a 2%.
Oh, Bob, that's purchase channel. Let's stay on requisition channel here.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Lance Smith is asking, do SINs 105, 001, and 002 qualify to bid on the tools BPA? Donna or Jody Ann, do you have?
Those are SINs on the 51V hardware store, I believe. And so those are being addressed for MRO and JanSan.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
I believe so. Thank you, Donna.
Uh-huh.
So a question in here, why is office supplies an IDIQ and JanSan and MRO a schedule buy? As I said leading off, it's because we're in different stages of development in the strategic sourcing solution. For JanSan and MRO, since this is our first generation solution, we don't have the granular data on what's been purchased. the exact items, the quantities, the prices that were paid, that we really need in order to go outside of the BPA world. We have that data with office supplies, so we're better able to evaluate pricing across a much larger breadth of products. That's what drives the differences in the acquisition process. Question, what is the best way to contact the team directly? We have posted up on Interact, where you signed up for and saw this announcement. There are email boxes that are for each one of the commodities, so the best way is to send an email to the email box. And we'll be posting those up here shortly in the chat box.
We understand may go up. What we're looking, but overall price, right, because we're buying more and strategic sourcing should go down and offset that, right?
That's
a balance, yes.
Right. So there's a question, will customers pay any additional markup beyond the industrial funding fee? Yeah, we do have a processing charge, a management fee within the global supply system that we have. So a comment here from Jeremy that saying that FSSI has been overwhelmingly rejected by the vendor community and some trade associations. And what's the driving force behind this? The driving force is economic. As government budgets have shrunk, and there's been the push to reduce government spending, this is where we need to look at our spending, and these are the types of tools that we need for buying common commodities. It's driving to price more as being a factor than perhaps it ever has been before. Just looking for any more questions here. Question, will current GSA schedule holders who are not awarded a BPA under FSSI, presumably that's for either JanSan or MRO, be able to renew their schedule when the current schedule expires? We currently don't see any closing of schedule there for JanSan or MRO, and for the requisition channel, that's still separate from the purchase channel.
Distribution.
So Nancy, you said, can you define distribution assets? Not, I guess we're not remembering where that was used. So there's a comment there on if price is king, why not don't put any emphasis on small business requirements and open it up to Chinese products. Well, there's several things here. We still do have socioeconomic concerns that we need to meet within the government. And as far as Chinese products, they're not Trade Agreement Act compliant. So there are still a number of statutes that we have to meet.
I would also just add is, nobody said price is king. What we're saying is that we should be leveraging the buying power of the government and GSA to get better prices for government, versus buying one thing, the price you pay, versus us buying thousands of things, which is what we do.
So there's questions regarding the number of vendors. There will be multiple vendors for NSNs that should be reflected in the draft procurements that are out there. So there's a question here on asking what our markup is. And Patrick?
And what we're saying is that, although we're not releasing specific numbers at this time, part of moving to the strategic partner delivery model is that markup would be significantly less than it is now, resulting in cost savings to our customers. That is part of the reason of the $100 million in annual savings by not having two distribution centers. So that model accounts for it, and as thus our markup will also be reduced.
Thank you. So there's a question in here regarding the reporting, data reporting, the level 3 data reporting that we have under the purchase channel, and noting that we don't have that reporting requirement here. And yes, that's correct. We don't have it here because all of the orders are processed through GSA system. So we do, within the requisition channel, we do have visibility to line item level what is purchased and where it goes. So that's something we don't have under the purchase channel. That's why there is the difference there. The question, by shrinking the supplier base, how will this affect the Ability One program? There won't be any impact. We're still buying the Ability One products just as we have, whether we buy from one vendor or multiple vendors.
Right, there's a question about the VSM. What the VSM is requirement for specifically for our DoD customers for shipping OCONUS overseas, we'll be shipping those to a distribution consolidation point. And then they'll be taken over there for DLA or DoD transportation to deliver. So they need to meet the DoD standards for packaging and marking so DoD can make sure they get to the right place. So that's where it's mostly for the OCONUS. That's where the requirement is, and then there's overall standard labeling, but the DSM's for that.
Thank you, Patrick. So the question of concern on the delivery requirements for 4 calendar days anywhere in the U.S., and the concern that needing to ship over weekends, yeah, we need to look and make sure that it's 4 calendar days or 4 business days. It should be 4 business days. We'll have to go back and revise that. So there's a question or comment in there. Why not set a pricing standard like a certain percent above a set price to allow more small businesses to maintain vendor selection to customers? Within the requisition channel, since this isn't a direct contractor to customer relationship, and it's rather going through GSA, we're more driven by our ability to do that current electronic data interface interchange with vendors to transmit the orders. And you know, as hopefully you all have seen in some of the purchase channel for the 3rd generation of office supplies, where we actually, because we have the data, we've talked about having the ability in an open season there to add more vendors. These currently being first, you know, for 1st generation, we don't have that ability. We don't have that understand what that right price is. So for APO and FPO shipments, there's a question in there that typically are costly and require special handling, asking about the relative percentage of orders, CONUS versus OCONUS, to a DoD consolidation point. I mean, I believe my understanding is that with the marking and packing requirements, if vendors are following those, that covers what should be the costly concern. There shouldn't be any difference.
Correct. I mean, it's part of registering and getting on the vendor, the VSM or a similar system is the forms are all standardized, and all they have to do is input their information, and the labels and such will be printed to the standards. So that would, and also if necessary, we'll be providing training or an overview to vendors on how to use the system, how it does it. So we're hoping to minimize that because it would be standardized, always repeatable, and a standard system.
Thank you, Patrick. There have been a number of questions in here that regarding the environmental green elements built into here. And yeah, the intent is that we're providing green products through the solution, and some questions regarding the green elements as they relate to the IDPs. You can go greener generally than the IDP, not less green than the IDP. So Nancy, it's a question on does your company own distribution assets? Trying to understand your ability to actually make the deliveries. We've had the question from several people, the concern about the time of deliveries. So that's the question there, to understand how shipments are going to be, how you all are going to be making your shipments. That's the background behind that question. Okay, I'm seeing the questions slow down. I think we've answered most. I know there's some more technical ones out there. And we still have the draft procurements on the street. You have through the 26th to make your comments. That's another week to provide some real specific comments there. I want to go ahead and thank everyone for your participation today. As we said, we'll work to take this session and run it through the process to get it compliant and get it posted. That typically takes us 3 weeks or so. We'll also take the questions that you've submitted and work to answer those and post those up on Interact. With that, I'm going to go ahead and thank you all for your time today. We look forward to meeting with you in the future.
Thank you, Walter. Again, this is Tim, your host. I just posted a link to a brief survey. I just ask that you take a moment to fill it out. It's only about 16 questions. Your feedback is very important to us, and we'd just like to see your responses in that survey. And with that, thank you all for attending, and stay tuned for any future events on your respectfully your Interact teams. Their Interact pages on Interact with GSA. And with that, I'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you all for attending.